Good morning, Presiding Officer, High Commissioner Pillay, Professor John Ruggie, and really dear friends. When I look around at the faces and the labelling of the 80 human rights institutions, national human rights institutions that are present, and then this great gallery of young people, have you still got the stamina for another speech before we all have our coffee? It's been quite a morning, but I think it's a morning that's coming together very well because I really share in the warm thanks to the Scottish Parliament, the Scottish Government, the International Coordinating Committee of the National Human Rights Institutions, and all others who have made this 10th anniversary event possible. It's a real pleasure to return to Edinburgh and to come back to this Parliament building, which I've had the pleasure of visiting on a number of occasions. And each time it really strikes you when a Parliament building is created in a thoughtful way, what a difference it makes, how much it resonates, and how significant and symbolic it is. As I listened to High Commissioner Navi Pillay this morning, I was really struck by how much progress has been made, and I want to pay tribute to her and to her office for the strong links that have been forged over those years with national human rights institutions. I remember valuing the important development of national human rights institutions, the Paris Principles, the regional meetings, but that was really at the beginning of what has become such an important linking now globally. But I also want to be upfront at the beginning on what I know is in many of your minds, the difficulty of having the resources and the staffing for the kind of work that you are challenged to do in being that independent bridge between governments and civil society and the country at large. And now here is a new area, not so new for some of you, that you're being invited to begin to work in. So I know that you will be challenged, but that's why this meeting is so important, because in the working groups and when you're discussing together, it will, I think, be enormously helpful to be able to share experiences and learn on areas where you can, in fact, become involved and engaged. I have enjoyed contact over the year with human rights institutions, most recently in July when I was in Sierra Leone and attended a meeting of the National Human Rights Commission in a packed hall, standing room only, discussing, I must say, more traditional issues of peace and reconciliation, issues of violence, but nonetheless, that familiar sense of the importance of the role that national human rights institutions play. And I don't really need to say very much about John Ruggie's mandate, since he has outlined it so clearly here this morning, other than to reiterate how important that framework of protect, respect and remedy will be to your work in bringing it to country level and making it operational. I'm delighted, as High Commissioner Navi also mentioned, that the International Coordinating Committee of NHGRIs has established a cross-regional working group on business and human rights, and I know with Denmark in the chair that this working group will be able to play a strong role in the follow-up to this conference. I really think I'll focus on three areas where human rights institutions can play an important role, because much of what I might have said has been covered by the speakers before me, and I am between you and that cup of coffee that I know many of you are beginning to think about. But I believe that there are three specific areas where national human rights institutions can play a really important role in what is, to me, an extraordinarily important area now of human rights. And perhaps having just referenced the framework that John Ruggie has developed and is now working under his mandate to provide guidelines to the Human Rights Council next June, I would again publicly like to commend John himself and his very small team for the extraordinary work that they have done. And you've seen his enthusiasm for the mandate and the way in which he has been able to galvanize extraordinary resources to enable him to put forward this framework, have it unanimously accepted by the Human Rights Council, and now be working on these important guidelines. And there's no doubt in my mind that this framework will be enormously helpful to you in human rights institutions in beginning the work, as I said, of putting it into effect in practice. So let me look at 3 specific areas where I think your work can be particularly valuable. The first involves bringing the experience and legitimacy of national human rights institutions to bear on complex issues where accountability and responsibility involving private sector actors may not be well defined and where legitimate dispute mechanisms may be lacking. Though many of you may not naturally see yourselves in this role, I believe that national human rights institutions are in fact strategically placed to serve as national level conveners of all relevant stakeholders around these issues, governments, business, trade unions, and broader civil society, in addressing human rights challenges where business is involved directly or indirectly in rights abuses, or on issues where business could be a key actor in supporting greater realization of rights for all. Let me take a moment to reflect on how I'm seeing this happen today already in 2 specific contexts. One of the hats that I'm pleased to be wearing here today is I chair the Institute for Human Rights and Business, which was established last year, and it's a new centre of global expertise dedicated to deepening understanding of human rights challenges and clarifying the appropriate roles of business. Over the past year, the Institute has been developing partnerships with 2 national human rights institutions, those of South Africa and Kenya. Last month, the Institute co-organised with the South African Human Rights Commission a meeting in Johannesburg to explore the human rights due diligence implications for companies operating in countries experiencing conflict or weak government. And John Ruggie referenced that this is where you tend to have more human rights abuses. The outcome of this work, which will be released early next year, will be a series of recommendations for governments and companies on how private sector actors can operate responsibly in such situations and contribute to conflict resolution and reconstruction efforts. And I must say, from the Institute's perspective, having the South African Human Rights Commission's expertise and convening authority has been a great contribution to this effort. And the Institute is also developing cooperation with the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights for a meeting which will be held in Nairobi in early 2011 on responsible corporate water management and use, with a particular focus on the agricultural sector. So the question from Nicaragua is one that is actually going to be dealt with in that meeting convened in Nairobi by the Kenyan National Human Rights Institute. And indeed, a fellow board member of the Institute, Wambi Kimathi, is a member of the Kenyan Commission, and she has been actively involved in planning this collaboration. So I would ask you to think about the possibility of this key convening role, particularly because not everybody will have heard John Ruggie. He says he's on a marathon of talking about his mandate and the framework, but he can't get to everybody. And at national level, you may be the very ones who will be able to convene and explain the framework and explain the role that your national human rights institution can play in relation to it. A second area where I believe there's great scope for NHRIs to contribute to the evolving business and human rights field is through more direct engagement with the UN Global Compact. As John Ruggie has already mentioned, and as you know, the Global Compact is the world's largest voluntary corporate citizenship initiative. In June, it marked its own 10th anniversary with a leadership summit in New York. I'm on the advisory board of the Global Compact, and I think, John, you were a little high in the number. I think the actual number is some 7,000 participants currently in the Global Compact, but there is a plan to grow that number to 20,000 by 2020, which is quite ambitious, but it also shows that there is an opportunity to mainstream corporate responsibility on the global business agenda. But what is particularly important, and still a big question for us to think about, is the quality of engagement that Compact participants undertake. This has to be scaled up as well over the coming decade, with greater attention given to demonstrating how companies are integrating into their policies and practices the Compact's 10 principles in the area of human rights, labour and environmental standards and transparency. It's not enough just to sign up to the Global Compact and post under one or other of the principles some progress. There's a need to deepen the relationship. And it's worth thinking about the structure now of the Global Compact. It has over 70 local networks at national level, made up of participating companies and other stakeholders. And these tend to be smaller companies, SMEs, medium-sized companies. So you will have a network of the Global Compact, and maybe your national human rights institution has already linked. I was in Ghana, and I see Ron Popper here, one of the business leaders. We were at a meeting in Ghana of the local network of the Global Compact there that was a convening for local networks in different parts of Africa. And there were a lot of questions being asked. At that time, the framework of John Ruggie wasn't fully elaborated, but there is really a role, and an early linking with the local network of the Global Compact would be one way in which a national human rights institution can start to work on areas that would deepen the commitment and the understanding of companies of the Protect, Respect and Remedy framework. I believe myself that there is an opportunity to align the Global Compact at national level with the Protect, Respect and Remedy framework. And I'm also chair of the Human Rights Working Group of the Global Compact, and would welcome input from national human rights institutions. We from time to time have webinars where 30, 40, sometimes 45 or 50 people on a webinar discussing dilemmas and discussing issues. And that would be something that I think would be very welcome. And indeed, the issues that you would want to raise would be the very issues that the Human Rights Working Group should be hearing. We should hear from you because you deal at national level and you interface with government and with business and civil society more generally.